Hello everyone, and welcome back to another whiteboard video. Today I want to tell you why your mind-muscle connection sucks and what you can do. It's a very simple change to fix that. Not only just across the exercises that maybe you're struggling with now, but perhaps just all exercises. And if you're a trainer, you can help your clients achieve the same. So if we're in a sort of frowny face situation here, poor mind-muscle connection, you can't seem to feel the right things. Oftentimes, what does this framework assume and where does it go wrong? Well, in my estimation, this is my opinion, but you all tell me what you think of this. I think that this framework of exercise, what I'm about to describe, is really the root of the problem. And it's going to be somewhat counterintuitive. And this framework puts muscles over load. Okay? What does that mean? Well, should be somewhat intuitive, but let's give an example. If you're not feeling, let's say, your delts in a lateral raise, and I'll go over a diagram after this to sort of illustrate in concrete terms what I mean by all this. Let's say you're doing a lateral raise and you just can't seem to feel your middle delt, right? And maybe you feel a bunch of other stuff, like you feel your traps in your neck, stuff that a lot of people tend to feel when they're doing lateral raises. Well, the muscle overload framework, and by load I really just mean resistance, the external things that are pushing or pulling against us, the muscles overload framework basically says that in order to solve the mind-muscle connection in that circumstance, what I need to do is I need to improve my brain's ability to send a signal to my delt so that I can feel my delt and contract my delt more or better. And my opinion on this is that it should be the opposite, right? So what do I mean by that? We should assume a load over muscle framework. And not only that, but we should assume that the muscle is actually always right? Kind of like the customer is always right. The muscle is always right. And what does that mean? Well, if you're feeling something, if you're recruiting something, if you're fatigued in a muscle, it's not random. It doesn't just, your brain doesn't just randomly decide like, I feel like I'm gonna contract my quad when I'm doing a biceps curl. No, it chooses the best solution to the problem. So if in the lateral raise example, you're feeling your traps in your neck instead of your delts, the question shouldn't be how can I improve my mind to muscle connection, but how can I change the load, i.e. the load over muscle priority, so that my muscles have to respond. So this is a total framework shift, which is that rather than thinking about exercise as being something like we are contracting our muscles intentionally and we're just sort of adding resistance on top of that, what we're doing is we're picking specific exercises so that muscles, i.e. the responders, can appropriately contract against that load. So this is really a total 180. It might seem similar, but I promise it's 180 degrees the opposite framework, which is that instead of assuming our brains and our muscles are the problem, we rather assume that the load and the way that we have the load set up is the problem. And really what the big picture takeaway with this whole framework is that muscles are simply responders, okay? They're not consciously deciding when to contract. Of course, you and your brain, you can imagine something, you can consciously contract it, but why bother even using resistance if that's the framework you're going to assume? You could just sit there all day and just be squeezing things as you're trying to go through the motions. So the framework shift is we pay attention to load first, and we alter how the load is affecting us to change the muscle response. We don't internally make a decision about what muscle we're going to use and then, just do nothing about the resistance, because ultimately if the resistance doesn't change, only our internal sort of squeezing is going to be the thing that adds fatigue. And that's not how we progressive overload. That's not how we add progressive tension over time. That's not how we get bigger and stronger. What do the strongest people on the planet do? Let's say pick a bench press. What do the strongest bench pressers do? They push, right? And the muscles respond. They don't have to think about squeezing their pecs. They just push, and their pecs do the job. All right, so what's a concrete way to sort of maybe solve this one example, potentially, that I talked about in the middle deltoid, and specifically not feeling your middle delt in a lateral raise? Well, let's say this person is doing a lateral raise, okay? And this is at the top of the motion. All right, so here's a dumbbell. what does the dumbbell want to do in a lateral raise? It wants to fall downward, right? And this is the top of the motion, obviously, but let's just draw a picture. For whatever reason, the legs are really short. What's happening in the bottom of the range? Well, the resistance is still pulling downward. So in either case, a downward and a downward resistance, what is this situation going to ask of the shoulder? And think about it very simply. Imagine if you had an 100-pound dumbbell and you were holding it in your hand, what would it want to do in your shoulder at the bottom position, i.e. when the middle delta is in the best mechanical position to act against the load? Well, all it would want to do is it would just want to pull your shoulder down, right? Think about a dumbbell shrug. So if the resistance is always wanting to pull us down, right, what is going to always have to be working, whether we're holding it here or holding it here? The traps, the things that pull the shoulder girdle directly upward. So what might we want to do instead of using a dumbbell and angling the resistance down? Well, instead of using a dumbbell, we could use a cable, right? And what would that do? Well, if we had a cable, I'll draw this in, let's say green here, and we angled it across our body so that it was pulling this way. If a cable is angled across our body and it's pulling our arm this way, is that loading a shrugging motion? No, the only thing that it's loading is my arm. It's pushing my arm into my body, i.e. where my middle deltoid resists against, right? And by the time you get to the top of the motion, assuming the cable stays in the same spot over here, right, it's still pretty much pulling you in that across direction. So hopefully this framework makes sense. From, dumbbell raise to cable lateral raise. By the way, there are ways to do that with dumbbells as well. You could lie on your side and manipulate the dumbbell. It's not the dumbbell's fault. It's how you chose to interact with the dumbbell and what happened to all your muscles in response to the positions, the motions, and the tempos that you used in that exercise. So overall, this framework, again, it's load over muscle, not muscle over load. Muscles, they're not at fault, we're at fault, specifically in the way that we're setting up against or in relationship to the resistance. And so from lateral raise number 1 to lateral raise number 2, did my muscles all of a sudden just be like, oh, I guess it's time to show up for work? No. You just changed the resistance scenario, and as a consequence, your mind-muscle connection, which is really just a muscle's response, your muscle's response to resistance, was improved, right? You didn't improve the mind-muscle connection, but what appeared as the mind-muscle connection happened to be more in line with your expectation because of the fact that you changed the resistance. So I hope this all was a little bit of a framework shift in a positive sense. Please let me know if you have any questions about this, and you can ask those questions in my free online community. No cost, no credit card, nothing. Just click the link in the description. It's a free community, over 2,000 members in there now asking great questions every single day, challenging one another with all these different kinds of topics and more.